Weed is older than the wheel. It's older than money, older than the alphabet, older than every religion currently practiced on Earth. People were deliberately burning this plant and breathing in the smoke before anyone had written a single word down, before the first city was ever built, before farming was fully figured out. The thing your grandparents thought of as a dangerous new vice is, in reality, one of the oldest experiences the human species has ever chased. We've been doing this for so long that the real question isn't when people started, it's how we ever convinced ourselves it was new. And the way it actually began is stranger and a lot darker than a guy with a guitar. Start with where the plant even comes from, because cannabis didn't appear everywhere at once. The plant's original homeland appears to be Central Asia, the high steppes and mountains around modern Mongolia, China, and the surrounding regions. That's the wild heartland, where the plant grew on its own long before any human paid attention to it. And the relationship started, as so many do, with usefulness that had nothing to do with getting high. Cannabis is one of the most useful plants a Stone Age people could possibly find. Its stalks make incredibly strong fiber, good for rope, nets, and eventually cloth. Its seeds are nutritious and full of oil, and you can eat them. So the first humans who bothered with cannabis almost certainly weren't after the high at all. They wanted rope and food. The intoxication was a side effect they stumbled into, and once they did, everything changed. How far back does the use actually go? Further than you'd guess. There are hints of humans using cannabis fiber stretching back 10,000 years or more, which puts it among the very first plants our species ever worked with. For comparison, that's right around the dawn of agriculture itself. Cannabis was in the human story almost from the moment we started settling down and paying close attention to plants at all. It wasn't a late addition. It was there near the beginning, woven into the origins of settled human life. But the question you're really asking is when people started smoking it to get high, deliberately, and here's where the archaeology gets genuinely chilling. In 2019, researchers published a discovery from a place called the Jirzangkal Cemetery, high in the Pamir Mountains of western China around 2,500 years ago. In ancient graves, they found wooden braziers, little burners containing charred stones and plant residue. When they chemically analyzed what was burned in them, they found cannabis, and not the weak wild kind. This cannabis had elevated levels of the compound that gets you high, meaning either these people had sought out unusually potent plants or were learning to cultivate for strength. And here is the part that matters. These braziers were in graves. The cannabis was being burned at funerals as part of a ritual for the dead. Picture it. A burial high in the cold mountains, mourners gathered in an enclosed space, hot stones in a wooden burner, cannabis thrown on top, and the smoke filling the air around the body. This is one of the oldest clear pieces of evidence we have of humans deliberately burning cannabis for its effects. And it wasn't a party, it was a ceremony to commune with the dead. The very first smoking we can clearly document was about death, spirits, and crossing into another world. And that connection, weed and the spirit world, shows up again and again across the ancient world, which is the part most people never hear. This plant wasn't born as a recreational drug. It was born as a sacred one. Travel west and you reach the ancient steppe peoples the Greek historian Herodotus wrote about around 2,500 years ago. He described a group called the Scythians, fierce nomadic horse riders, who would set up small tents, place hot stones inside, and throw cannabis seeds and plants onto the stones. The tent would fill with thick smoke, and Herodotus wrote that the Scythians would howl with joy at the vapor. For a long time, people assumed he was exaggerating or making it up. Then archaeologists digging Scythian burial sites found exactly what he described. Small tent frames, containers of charred cannabis, braziers with burnt seeds. The historian wasn't inventing a tall tale. He was describing a real practice, a steam and smoke ritual that doubled as something between a funeral rite and a communal high thousands of years ago, out on the open grasslands. Go to ancient India and the plant becomes openly holy. Cannabis appears in sacred texts going back thousands of years, named as one of a handful of plants believed to bring freedom, joy, and release from anxiety. It became deeply tied to religious devotion, associated with the god Shiva, consumed by holy men seeking to dissolve the boundary between themselves and the divine. A drink made from cannabis, called bang, has been part of religious festivals on the subcontinent for so long that it's not really possible to say when it started. It predates the records. By the time anyone was writing things down, cannabis was already woven into worship, as though it had always been there. This is the thread that ties the whole ancient story together. For most of human history, getting high on this plant wasn't seen as escape or rebellion. It was seen as a doorway, a way to reach gods, spirits, and the dead. China itself tells the same layered story. The Chinese were among the earliest to cultivate cannabis seriously, primarily for fiber and seed, going back many thousands of years. It was a staple crop, valued for hemp, rope, and cloth and food. It also entered Chinese medicine extremely early, recorded as a treatment for a long list of ailments in some of the oldest medical traditions on earth. The high was known, and interestingly, in mainstream Chinese culture, the intoxication was often viewed with suspicion, sometimes described in old texts as something that could cause people to see spirits if taken in excess. Even in distrust, the same association keeps surfacing. This plant and the world beyond the visible one linked over and over by completely separate cultures who had no contact with each other. But here's where it goes deeper. Because how did a plant from the mountains of Central Asia end up everywhere? In India, in the Middle East, in Africa, eventually in Europe, and across the seas? The answer is that cannabis spread the same way almost everything in the ancient world spread, on the backs of traders and travelers along the routes that stitched the continents together. As the great trade roads opened across Asia, cannabis traveled with the caravans, the way silk and spices did. It moved into the Middle East, where in some regions the smoke and the resin, what would later be called hashish, became woven into culture even where wine was forbidden. It spread south into Africa over the centuries, where various peoples adopted both its medicine and its smoke and developed their own pipes and traditions around it. And then, through later waves of trade, colonization, and the forced movement of human beings across oceans, the plant crossed into the Americas. Cannabis didn't conquer the world on its own. It hitchhiked on human movement, and because humans never stopped moving, the plant ended up nearly everywhere we did. By the time it reached the modern West, though, something had been lost in translation. The ancient sacred meaning, the funeral smoke, the doorway to the gods, mostly fell away. In the Americas and Europe, cannabis became, at different times, an industrial crop for rope and sails, then a medicine sold in pharmacies, then, in the 20th century, a target. It was made illegal across much of the world, wrapped in fear, tangled up with politics and race and crime in ways that had nothing to do with the plant itself. And out of that prohibition came the version you started with in your head, the 60s, the rebellion, the thing that felt brand new. But it was never new. The counterculture didn't discover cannabis. They were the latest stop on a road that ran back through prohibition, through pharmacies, through trade caravans, through Indian temples and Scythian tents, all the way back to mourners standing in the cold smoke of a mountain grave 2,500 years ago. So when did people start smoking weed? The honest answer is that we were doing it before we could write the answer down. We were burning this plant and breathing it in while we were still figuring out farming, still building the first settled communities, still inventing the idea of religion itself. And for almost all of that immense stretch of time, it wasn't about fun. It was about the sacred and the dead, a tool for reaching the things humans have always been most desperate to reach and least able to touch. Which leaves one strange thought to sit with. The high you might think of as a modern indulgence is one of the oldest experiences our species has deliberately sought out, older than nearly every belief, border, and book we have. People have been chasing this exact feeling for thousands of years, and the only thing that's really changed is what we tell ourselves it's for.